to have Gregory Wrightstone in studio with us. I got his book called Inconvenient Facts, the science that Al Gore doesn't want you to know. I got this about, 2 months ago, Keith, maybe?
Yeah.
And started reading it. I absolutely love it. It's not filled with gobbledygook that you can't understand. It's got all kinds of charts and graphs.
I love it.
Incredibly great facts. And in addition to the book, there's an app now, and that can be with you at all times. And so you've got those facts as well that you just go to your app and you can talk to people at parties or get-togethers or wherever. You got some climate change goofball in front of you. Gregory, welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me. Thanks for the kind words about the book and
Love
the
it.
app.
It's great.
Appreciate it.
First of all, let's start on page 46 of your book because there's a chart there that covers 4 billion years of temperature data on the planet. Now, how do we know what the temperature was 4 billion years ago? First of all, can you explain that to us?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that. I'm a geologist, but they use oxygen isotopes for a lot of that.
I was just going to say, it's obviously oxygen
but
isotopes.
There's a number of different proxies that they use to, and it's actually in the debate on climate change, and there is a debate, Virginia, that actually both sides kind of agree on that temperature data, and that temperature data shows us that for much of Earth's history, it's been significantly warmer than it is today in the current geologic period, as much as 17, 20 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than what it is today.
Wow.
Wait, 17 to 20 degrees hotter?
Oh, absolutely. It was,
wow.
So Earth thrived with higher temperatures. But the focus probably should be on the last 10,000 years of temperature data since the end of the last ice age in this current interglacial period we're in. That's really when man started creating civilizations, moving into villages, and then really the last 4,500 years. Because what Al Gore and his ilk need your listeners and viewers to believe is that our current temperatures and the rate of increase in temperature
are hotter than ever.
It's unusual and unprecedented. Those are the two words that they use.
Love those words.
Unusual and unprecedented. If indeed our temperatures today are unusual and unprecedented, then they probably have a pretty good argument that man's causing this. So we need to look back and see through geologic time and over the last several thousand years, have we really seen temperatures like that? And we have. And in the book and in the app, I document that over the last 10,000 years, there were 9 other warming trends that were very similar to what we're in right now. All of them ended with higher temperatures than what we are. So and all of them ended up before climate science became politicized, those warming periods were called climate optima for a reason, because both humanity and the earth prospered in those warm periods. We're being told just the opposite.
Wow. Well, to the left, to people shopping this nonsense, it has to be unprecedented, because if it's not, then your argument that, well, the climate's always changed works against them. But when they say it's unprecedented, then they've got the thing, well, it's never happened before and we've made it worse than it ever was, which isn't the case.
Yeah, there are many thousands of historical documents documenting crops, various things that showing that these periods of warming were much warmer than we are today. My wife and I traveled to the Mendenhall Glacier in Alaska. If you go there, you can see that during the last warming period, there are trunks of full-grown trees that are now being exposed by the retreating. Think about it.
Wow.
So during the last warming period, those were full-grown forests where the glacier is today that's just one example.
Now, when was the last warming period?
That was called the medieval warm period.
Okay, yes.
It was called
which they have sort of eliminated now, right?
Exactly. Dr. Michael Mann from Penn State. He's guilty of the ClimateGate emails, hiding data. He created what was called the hockey stick, which erased the medieval warm period. It erased the horrific Little Ice Age. When cold is bad. In the Little Ice Age, half the population of Iceland perished. It's thought that a third of the population of the Earth perished. We're being told just the opposite, aren't we?
Yeah.
Warming temperature will lead to famine and depopulation, when just historically over the last 4,500 years, it's a tremendous correlation between the rise and fall of temperature and the rise and fall of civilizations. If you were Emperor Grey in a warm period, you were pretty safe because you could feed your population, right? If you were Emperor Grey in a cold period and it started getting cold, you weren't going to be emperor very long because your subjects would be getting the pitchforks out because you couldn't feed them. All right, and we've just seen in these cooling periods with names like the Greek Dark Ages, the Dark Ages, and the Little Ice Age, we saw famine, pestilence, and mass depopulation regularly. Absolutely opposite of what we're being told.
Yeah, when it's warmer, food grows and becomes more plentiful.
Yeah.
But to avoid that little hang up, they continue to hammer the fact that it's going to be so hot.
Exactly.
That, ice melts, we drown, all of those sea level rise, all of that stuff.
Yeah, one of the fascinating things that's really cool is actually on my YouTube video, I've got a video on relating the witch hunts of late Middle Ages in Europe to temperature. And we saw once the temperature started dropping, of course the crops failed, we had famine, people started dying, and they were blamed on weather causing witches. And actually the Pope had an encyclical that approved for killing the witches. So they killed a bunch of witches, as many as 20 to 30,000 witches burned at the stake, all related to climate change, but in the wrong direction. One of the fascinating things was they started killing, and then about 1500, it started warming back up, right? Mm-hmm. Crops came back, food was plentiful. Mm-hmm. Well, why did the crops come back? They killed all the witches, right? So but that only lasted for 40 years, and then the temperature really dropped, and that's when the really big witch hunts and killings took place. So again, there's a strong correlation between bad things happening and cooling, and good things happening and warming.
And they've kind of staked out the other side of this argument is staked out an interesting position where no matter what happens on the planet, they're right. That makes them right. If it's hotter, they're right. It's global warming. If it's colder, they're still right because it's climate change, and it's colder than it ever has been. And now the polar vortex has been forced further south than it ever was. We used to get Arctic cold fronts. I grew up in Montana. It happened every single winter. But now they even point to the freezing cold and snow as evidence of global warming.
Oh, absolutely. And whenever we make fun of them when we have intense cold, going, oh, what about the global warming?
Right.
And I get blasted by the alarmists. Oh, well, you don't know the difference between weather
and climate. Yes.
But yet, if it was
every time it's hot,
83 degrees in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on February 3rd, they would, sure as heck they'd be using that as this is proof of global warming.
Yes.
But we're not allowed to do that. So it's really, and there will never be a debate, maybe not never, but they won't debate someone like me or any other qualified person because if they do, they acknowledge that there is a debate, and what they say the
debate's over.
The debate's over. The science is settled.
Yeah. What could be more fascist than that? By the way, the consensus thing was just something they made up out of thin air. And just started saying it so it became true. There's consensus on this and 97% agreement, and that's not true.
Well, that's not true. I devote an entire chapter of my book, as you know, to that. Mm-hmm. And John Cook that did that, his 97% consensus that everyone references, he would include me as part of that 97% consensus.
Because you agree that the temperature has risen.
I agree that CO2 increase is due to us mainly, and that CO2 increase has to have a warming effect on the atmosphere.
That's amazing. But you're a kook because...
I'm a denier. But I just argue
it's not
that
catastrophic.
I argue that CO2 warming is modest and greatly overwhelmed by the same natural forces that have been driving temperature since the dawn of time.
Yeah.
They don't want you to know that.
In your book, you quote National Geographic saying rains that are almost biblical, heat waves that don't end, tornadoes that strike in savage swarms. There's been a change in the weather lately. What's going on? So what is going on? What is the truth about all of that?
Yeah, a lot of what we're seeing about forest fires, droughts, it's just opposite of what we're being told. And particularly I like to use forest fires as a great example. We see actually the latest National Climate Assessment was forest fires were featured as the climate apocalypse event of the day. The cover and the back cover both featured forests in flame. What we actually find, and this is really what led me into this book, and before we get to that, let's just say I didn't set out to write a book. I set out to seek the truth. And it was that search for the truth that led to the writing of the book. And it was whenever I learned about forest fires is really when I said, oh my God, if they're lying to us about this, what aren't they lying to us about? Because I found that the science, the facts, and the data tell me that forest fires are actually in long-term decline globally, North America, and California, believe it or not. Even California, the data from CAL FIRE tell us that forest fires have been in decline about 50% over the last 30 years.
In decline? In
decline. Now, granted, the area burned has increased.
Wow.
Which means that each fire is necessarily bigger and probably more intense, but that's not a global warming issue. That's a forest management issue, just like Donald Trump told us. So the Sierra Nevada Conservancy tells us there are 4 or 5 times too many trees per acre than what a healthy forest should have.
Wow.
Pat Gray Unleashed.
All right, we've got Gregory Wrightstone here, author of the book Inconvenient Facts and the app that you can use pretty much anywhere. It's just a fantastic little tool for your climate change buddies.
Actually, it's very well documented that temperature changes first, CO2 follows it, and that's because it's counterintuitive a little bit because you think that warming oceans would mean that it could absorb more CO2, but just the opposite. Think about that liter jar of ginger ale in your refrigerator when it's cold. You open it up and it just goes. You put that liter jar of ginger ale on your patio table in the summer in August,
all right,
and that's the CO2 that's in there. You open that thing up and it's like a volcano. So what happens is the temperatures of the oceans warm, it expels CO2. That's historically been the case. The alarmists will say, oh, but everything's changed now since we're adding so much CO2. So it's all the past processes that have been in action in Earth, everything's changed now because we've added 120 parts per million of CO2. Well, I tell you what, if you look at
minuscule.
The big dirty secret they don't want you to know is that our current geologic period has the lowest CO2 level since the Precambrian, the lowest.
Do they admit to that? What do they say to that fact?
They say it's, I don't think they really address it. That's one of the inconvenient facts that they don't want you to know. The average, we're at a little over 400 parts per million right now. The average CO2 level in the history of the Earth has been 2,600 parts per million.
Oh my gosh.
6.5 times what it is. And even the scariest chart in the book is the last 140 million years of CO2 data. We went from 2,500 parts per million in a straight line down to what I call the line of death. It's 150 parts per million. We got within a whisker of that at the end of the last ice age. If we ever crossed that 150 part per million, that's the line where plant life can't survive. And
so
we nearly got there.
You would start into a mini ice age again.
You'd kill every plant on Earth.
Okay.
And everybody, any animals that are relying on plant life. That's the line of death, the minimum threshold for plant life to exist. We've seen a tremendous explosion of life on the planet because of increasing CO2. The Earth is greening, thriving, and prospering due to rising temperatures and increasing CO2. And it's not even close. NASA tells us that up to 50% of the Earth is greening. In other words, vegetation is increasing.
Yeah.
Less than 4%, according to NASA. And your viewers can go back and Google NASA and greening, those two words. They go, Wrightstone, you don't know what you're talking about. Go in and see for yourself. It's amazing what's happening. Probably the most amazing thing we can point at like this is the Southern Sahara, the Sahel. 300,000 square kilometers of the Southern Sahara turning into a lush grassland. It's amazing. People and animals are moving back into this. We see the same thing in Western India, China, and parts of Australia, formerly arid desert conditions, greening. And that's a really, really good thing. And the experts attribute it to a combination of warming temperatures, which leads to more precipitation, and increasing CO2, which means plants don't need as much water to survive.
Yeah, we had
prosper.
A press release come out just 2 days ago from NASA that said that 5% more coverage of a rainforest,
a 5% increase
since the early part of the century. So in less than 20 years, we've grown our forests in this planet by 5%.
Shouldn't that be a front page?
It should be.
Yeah.
Editorial in the New York Times.
Yeah.
It will never be. You can believe if it was the other way, if there was a 5% decrease,
Sure.
they'd run with that on the front page.
No question.
And
More
it's-
deserts.
More
No
deserts.
question.
It's just, we see this time after time after time, these things that I call the climate apocalypse events that are predicted. Droughts, forest fires, famine, intense heat waves. They're not increasing, they're decreasing.
Hurricanes.
Landfalling hurricanes in the United States are in significant
Way down.
decline. We see the long-term decline of tornadoes. 2013 and 2016 were the two lowest numbers of tornadoes.
And they continually say the opposite.
Absolutely. They take every disaster, don't let a disaster go unused, because they need to turn it into global warming. And I think it goes back to, I opened my book up with a quote from H.L. Mencken, who, just to paraphrase, he said that governments and institutions need to create these imaginary hobgoblins of alarm with which to frighten the population, because you need a frightened population to enact things like the Paris Climate Accord. Why in the world would the United States voluntarily impose economically crippling sanctions like carbon tax or this Green New Deal? Why would we do it? The only answer to that is that we're sitting on the edge of a climate apocalypse. That's our fault.
Right.
And the only way we can save it is to reduce CO2. When in actuality, we see that CO2 is infusing and benefiting both Earth and humanity.
But the problem is they've done such a great job of convincing people that what they say is true, that they're Chicken Little screaming that the sky is falling. And they've done this in our school system, and virtually all millennials believe this, including my daughter, some of my own kids. And I've tried to explain this to them, but they've done such an effective job, it's almost impossible to get through to them. So that's why I'm so happy that you've got this new app.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a geologist, and even my scientist friends find it very difficult to talk about climate change with other people because it's such an emotional issue. People get hot and bothered about it. What this does is puts the charts in the palm of your hand. That way, if your idiot nephew at Easter dinner tells you polar bears are going extinct, you can say, "Oh, wait a minute, Billy. Here's a chart of 60 years of polar bear population history." And he goes, "Oh, well, what's the source?" And you can click on the source, and you go, Susan Crawford, the top polar bear expert in the world. Okay, that's a pretty good source. So you can have this information, and empowers scientists and non-scientists alike with well-referenced, well-sourced information that's in charts that are easy to understand. And a lot of these I've created videos, 3 to 4 minute videos that you can link to and watch about each one of these inconvenient facts. I think it's a truly powerful resource.
I do too. It's great.
And if you search for inconvenient facts at the App Store or the Google Play Store, inconvenient facts.
And I think the book itself is a great homeschool source as well.
Keith, I just had a fellow out of Galveston buy 1,000 books. Oh. He says, I've got to get this in all of my schools. He's sending one to each of the United States congressman and saying he bought 1,000 books.
Nice. Wow.
I got another guy he just ordered 50 books. So I've probably got 15 or 20 people that have bought more than 50 books just to hand out to people.
And what I love about the book is you're clearly not some extremist on this issue. You don't deny that there's no warming going on. You don't deny that some of what they have said has some merit. But you just make a reasoned case that it's not catastrophic. Certainly, it's not the end of the world. We don't need to go out and spend $100 trillion fixing a problem like this when it's actually beneficial for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible. Again, it's red is white, up is down, left is right.
That's for sure.
It's everything that they're telling us. Just I go back to forest fires, about how absolutely easily it's provable that forest fires are decreasing. And again, I'll ask your viewers, if they're lying to you about that, what else are they lying to you about?
It's a great question. Gregory Wrightstone, author of Inconvenient Facts. Look for the app, too, at the App Store. And you can also check him out on Glenn's show coming up, 10:30 Central Time?
10:30.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll see you tomorrow on Pat Gray Unleashed.